Welcome back to the Control Oversee, a gaming podcast. I am your, I don't even know, navigation person. What was is there a co-captain on the Star Trek Enterprise?
What, you think I'm actually a nerd and watch that shit?
Anyways, outside of insulting an entire demographic of nerds, I am
We're
your
a video game podcast, not a Star Trek podcast. Chill
I
out,
mean,
Captain Picard.
at least you got the reference right there. But anyways, welcome to the Control Oversee podcast. I am your co-host, Ike Isaacs, and of course, we're joined with the main bitch himself, Salsa Shark.
I'm not going to say that's an inaccurate portrayal of who I am.
I'm a bad bitch.
I'm a bad bitch. I know what I like.
That's right. So we're going to go ahead and jump right into it, folks. So a common theme over the last couple of podcasts is talking about the whole Xbox versus PlayStation. I would call it a debacle, really. So we've been really talking about that, really hitting it heavy. And the main reason we've been hitting it so heavy is because, we've been getting news about the releases, prices, and so on and so forth. And we have another update. Salsa, you can give the update. I will just jump in when you need me to.
All right, I'll try to keep this as short as possible. Basically, the PlayStation 5, we knew they were going to have a little trouble competing with the Xbox and their $300 brand new discless console. And of course, PlayStation 5, they weren't going to give up and just roll over, let it be. So they put out their own version for about $400. It's a whole $100 more than the Xbox discless. So, I don't know. In my personal opinions, I don't think that's going to be enough to make up for the loss of sales. Thoughts?
Yeah, I would agree. Because Xbox has the S series, which is going to be the $299 price point, right? And then the X series is going to be the is it $499?
Yes.
So basically, you have PS5 rolling in here with a $400 price point for a discless console, and they're going to have a disc-in console that's going to hit at about $499. So you're maybe saving $100 going discless. So if their intentions were for people to just say fuck it and get the disc version, that may be accomplished, but they're going to accomplish it by losing money. Because truthfully, the $100 reduction does not make me want to buy a PS5. It honestly makes me want to buy an Xbox even more.
It's just not a great time. Economically speaking, it's not a great time to release a brand new $500 console without some sort of leeway to buy the same thing, but weaker for almost half the price, which is where Xbox has them beat, without a doubt.
Right.
And on top of that, you heard about the scalpers, right?
Yeah, they put it on pre-order and basically scalpers swooped in and bought them.
Immediately. No hesitation. These scalpers these days are real sons of bitches, to be honest.
No, they really are. I was gonna say, it's bad too because you already know that people are gonna be shitty about it. Obviously, I would be shitty about it. So Sony's basically like, well, shit, what are we supposed to do about that?
I'm gonna be honest. I think, and this is gonna be a very controversial opinion, I personally believe that there needs to be legislation put in place to make it illegal to scalp.
Honestly, I would agree. I think that the primary issue that we have, especially in our current market, especially with video games, or with any market even, there's a lot of people who will go in and, scalp tickets like nobody's business in order to meet a demand that has been, perpetrated for no real reason, and the worst part is that it's not even like these scalpers are going to sell them for less. What they're going to do is they're going to capitalize on demand. There's going to be a very high demand for the consoles. And we've already talked about how, Sony's going to have a lot less in regards of the quantity of their stock So they're going to have a lot less to start with. So now the scalpers can comfortably swoop in, purchase up all these pre-orders, and then probably sell them for damn near double, is what I would imagine.
Oh yeah, no doubt. There are already people who have pre-ordered it, loaded up as many as they could the minute they came out, and are selling consoles they do not physically have their hands on yet. They're selling you the promise that when they get it, they will send it to you.
Which is honestly, that's really sketchy, but there's a market for it. There is a market for that. There are people who have the money they have the disposable income or the disposable money to go ahead and throw down on a console that's that expensive, and and they're more than likely going to be the first ones to get it because they've basically purchased a black market pre-order from a scalper. And honestly, it's also kind of hard to process because if you think about it, I mean, who's to say that scalper's legit? You know what I mean? Like, who's to say that they're going to really send you the console once they come out?
Yeah, I guarantee at least 20% of the people who are paying scalpers are not going to receive anything come launch day.
Probably not. They're probably gonna get screwed. I mean, that's just how it is.
And the thing is, I don't want them to be screwed, but it's an inevitability, especially when you're dealing with, in my opinion, such heinous and downright sinful behavior.
Really. So obviously
The
we're
word
both pretty
sinful
much.
around often.
You're like, I don't really use that phrase too often, but it felt pretty necessary. But no, and then we both agree on that. But also to kind of even further throw the nail in the coffin of Sony, it's already bad enough. Sony's going to have a lower number of lower quantity of PS5s. It's bad enough that their price points are not even somewhat competitive. It's not like they're throwing it out there for $350 or $325. They're throwing it out there for $400, $100 more expensive than the Xbox S series. So not only are they getting screwed in quantity, not only are they getting screwed by scalpers, not only are they getting screwed by their own horrible, horrible, horrible pricing scheme, but they're also getting screwed because Xbox is continuing to be competitive because they buy Bethesda.
And how do I say this? It's a bold move because on one hand, that means Xbox now owns the company that made Fallout 76. On the other, theoretically, the next Fallout game, the next Elder Scrolls, even the next Doom could be Xbox exclusives. Unlikely,
Yeah.
but they could.
Yeah. Honestly, I have a feeling that they'll probably make at least one of those titles Xbox exclusive, just because Xbox really doesn't have many exclusive titles outside of Halo, and I feel like they need to add to their repertoire, which is very smart marketing. I can't even shit on the fact that they bought Bethesda because realistically, that's super fucking smart of them. I mean, really, that is smart of them. You buy these really popular companies that have been really putting out shitters. I mean, we don't even get to start on Fallout 76 again. So they buy these companies that have really just put out shitty content these last few years. They bring them over to Microsoft and they say, you know what, we're going to try and do better with you. And I have a feeling that they're going to follow through on that, and they're going to probably make some exclusive titles with these dying companies. Todd Howard. And they're going to do good stuff with them, which I think is going to end up being pretty fruitful for Microsoft. And, I don't think Sony, at the end of the day, Sony will probably be fine. They will probably at some point, once they get better quantity of their product, they'll probably end up lowering the price, if I had to guess, because there's no way in hell that they're going to be able to stay competitive unless they do. So, I don't know. Take that with a grain of salt. We're not experts. We're just commoners in the overall cog of the, machine.
Not to be depressing or anything, but we are the lower dregs of society.
Pretty much. But we are merely peons in the corporate machine, the capitalism machine.
Though I will point out another brilliant thing Xbox has over PlayStation now is the fact that Xbox has diversified. You can now play almost any Xbox games on the PC because they're now doing a hand-in-hand collaboration because it's all Microsoft.
Exactly.
And I think it's going to be hard for PlayStation in the next few years because what are they going to do to compete with that? You can play
Not much.
Halo on Steam right now. Halo. There's nothing else to say there. It's just not even a befuddling situation. It's befuddling that PlayStation still exists, to be honest. I get it. They've had a couple bangers here and there. You know, Bloodborne was supposedly pretty cool or whatever, but now not only are they fighting Xbox, they're fighting Microsoft as a whole. That is a multifaceted corporate war.
Well, and honestly, what you're probably going to see, and this is just something I just kind of thought of, is with Microsoft's acquisition of Bethesda, I have a feeling that you're going to see, because obviously PlayStation purchased Naughty Dog, and they purchased Naughty Dog at a time where Naughty Dog was at its lowest. And I have a feeling that there are going to be other companies like that come around. And these, honestly, it's going to be one of those things that these companies that make really good games, if they ever start to go south or if they ever start to lose too much money, they're going to get bailed out by one of these two superpowers. Obviously, Nintendo owns a lot of, companies that produce, video games already. A lot of them are in the foreign market, if I'm not mistaken. But, I have a feeling that if things ever start to go south, you'll see companies trying to get bailed out by one of the video game giants, and I think PlayStation will continue to acquire other entities similar to that of Naughty Dog and similar to that of Bethesda. These smaller companies, I say smaller in relative terms, but you know what I mean. So I have a feeling that this will be a continuing effort on all fronts in the future.
We'll see. One can only hope that there's still some edge of competition there.
Hopefully, fingers crossed. But also, so basically, for the most part, we just wanted to throw that little intro in because, we've been really talking heavy about the console wars 2.0, essentially. So we've been really hitting heavy on that because, honestly, we're in a very important time in video game history where, we're selling consoles during a pandemic, and it continues to show to be honestly, it's entertaining how the companies are handling it. So, we'll probably continue to talk about this in the future. But for now, we're going to talk about Resident Evil. So Salsa, he kind of curated some questions for us and some topics to discuss because both Salsa and I, as we've talked about many times before, love Resident Evil. Last time we spoke about the next-gen release of Resident Evil 8. We're both pretty excited about it. We're going to see the fates of Ethan and Mia, as we've seen Mia's dying in the trailer. And Ethan, I'm sure, is to follow suit. But we get to follow the story of an entirely different entity, probably a new virus, which should be cool. And I think we both pretty much share the same sentiment that we think it looks promising, but we're going to hold our breath because we have been let down before by Resident Evil and Capcom.
Yeah, I'll say we'll talk about it later. Some of Resident Evil's lesser mistakes, as we'll call them.
Right. But for now, we're going to kind of jump into, some discussion of remakes.
Oh boy. Alright, so as you know, Resident Evil 2 remake, absolute fucking banger. No doubt about it.
Absolute banger.
I mean, you play that game and you tell me that you're not hard as a rock the entire time.
Damn.
Resident Evil 3 remake, got me a bit floppy, to be honest.
So here's what I'll say is the Resident Evil 3 remake was great. What little there was of it.
Exactly.
Because with Resident Evil 2, like we even talked about this last time, Resident Evil 2 was a super long game. Each of the, I mean, I spent a couple hours minimum on at least 2 to 3 hours on each scenario, and there are 4 scenarios, so you have at least even I know speedrunners can usually accomplish those games in an hour, but on an average time you're looking at 2 to 3 hours if you're good. So you're looking at what is that, 8 to 12 hours or so of time gameplay. I mean,
I'll be honest. I would say all 4 campaigns alone, easily 11 to 15 hours of gameplay for the average gamer.
yep. And then not only do you have those 4 game modes, but you have bonus content. You have the survivor content where you play as Hunk, surviving varying difficulties of zombie onslaught. You have actual story modes that talk about side characters that you really don't know how they got there or where they're going in the campaign. And then even beyond that, you can unlock different weapons. You can unlock actually worthwhile things for the main story mode that makes you want to go back and play
I mean, yeah,
it.
I must have played each scenario at least twice.
Yep.
I've yet to play all of the side stories because I'll be honest, some of them shits kind of scare me.
Exactly.
Like I tried the Edward Kendo one Robert, whoever the fuck Kendo guy.
Yeah.
I tried that one and it was, I get it. A lot of people could probably do it, no problem. Not me. I tried that shit. I panicked. I was like, oh my god, I have no ammo. I'm fucked. And I just quit. I turned off my Xbox.
You're like game over.
I have too much anxiety for that shit.
And then you had the other
Appreciate
ones,
it. That's
which
the important thing.
right. And but that's what I was gonna say is even if you don't play it, you have the ability to play it. You know what I mean? Like
Exactly.
you have extra content you can work with, and that's kind of where we're coming from. Me and Salsa both agree. Resident Evil 3 is severely lacking. Even the old games had additional content, or the
Oh yeah.
games themselves were longer. The Resident Evil 1 remake was a long game or a longer game. You know,
And we'll talk
the
about the Resident Evil 1 remake a bit more because I have some interesting thoughts on that. But
right, but basically the primary focus before we move on to the other remakes is the Resident Evil 4 remake because we're pretty sure it's in the pipeline.
I
And
thought it was all but confirmed at this point.
is it? I don't remember. It might be. Let's
Let me
let's
let
do
me
a quick
Google.
Google search here.
Resident Evil 4 remake. Top results. Capcom is working on a Resident Evil 4 remake according to VGC, videogameschronicle.com. Promising. According to this, Resident Evil 4 remake enters full production.
So okay, so yeah, so then it is in full swing, based on that information. So, but obviously we haven't really heard much about it because you have Resident Evil 8 coming out this coming year, right? It's 2021, right?
Oh, I'm gonna be honest. I don't know. I have not been paying attention.
I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure when I saw the trailer it was 2021. But irregardless, Resident Evil 8 was kind of their first priority since they just pumped out a Resident Evil 3 remake, which they and honestly, it's not like they didn't have enough time to make it good. They had plenty of time to make it good. They just didn't. Um, it's they had. I'm not going to get into that, but anyway, so they had the Resident Evil 4 remake on deck. And obviously, for longtime Resident Evil fans, a lot of Resident Evil fans agree that the Resident Evil 4 game was probably one of the best games in the series, if not the best. A lot of people think that that is the hallmark of Resident Evil. A lot of people think that it is the greatest thing since sliced bread, and I'm not one to argue. I love it. But Salsa, what were your opinions on the original Resident Evil 4?
Now, truth be honest, or truth be told, however the saying goes, I thought Resident Evil 4 was good for its time. However, it was the first step in down a bad path.
Right.
For starters, it was the first Resident Evil with a third-person over-the-shoulder camera angle, which is now a staple in the genre. But at the same time, they're not zombies. They're these weird parasite-infected enemies, which is how, unfortunately, that decision directly spawned Resident Evil 5, which was a huge downgrade, but still somewhat enjoyable. But more
Right.
importantly, it is the reason we have Resident Evil 6.
Right.
And that is, quite honestly, a national tragedy.
Right. And here's the deal. Resident Evil 6 was not a bad game. It was just a bad Resident Evil game.
Exactly.
If you had put Resident Evil 6 out with different characters, completely different story, maybe modified a few things here or there, it is a very potential ridden entity if it were not Resident Evil, because Resident Evil has what we would call a legacy. Okay, prior to Resident Evil 4, basically you have all of these games. Resident Evil 1, 2, 3. I don't know how the dates worked out, but I think Resident Evil Remake came after 4. But you had Code Veronica, you had all of these lesser known titles like Dead Aim and Survivor 2 and all this other shit. And it just did not live up to the legacy. Now, don't get me wrong, I understand why they deterred from the previous formula. Leaving the old tank controls behind was probably for the best.
Well,
you know,
no. Resident Evil 4 still had pretty bad tank controls.
but at least it was a little more intuitive because
Yeah, a little bit,
you could actually physically choose where you aim. Whereas in the other games, it was just kind of like aim, and it's a probability. Okay, you're going to shoot him a few times, and then your crit chance is a probability.
I agree, though Resident Evil 4 still had random number generators. It was just less noticeable because you got to choose where to hit the enemy, which increases
Right.
or decreases your odds of a crit.
Well, that's what I was gonna say. Is if you're getting headshots, you're gonna vastly increase your potential of a instant kill or a head explosion or whatever the case is. And different weapons that you carry, shotguns, stronger weapons are going to vastly increase your abilities and everything else. So, but that was the thing, is the game was more intuitive. It had a lot more to it than the original games did, which is obviously no bash to the original games. They were great for their time and they do have sentimental value, but the Resident Evil 4 game was essentially where the future of the series was going to go. That more intuitive approach, that more technologically advanced approach, because we had better technology. Thoughts on that?
Sorry. The recording kind of cut out for a second, so I didn't really hear the end of that.
Oh, I was basically just saying that, with technology's evolution, we were able to basically see a more technologically advanced, Resident Evil game, and that's why the game was more intuitive and why it was different, because it needed to be different.
Of course, the earlier Resident Evils were more focused around a mystery. You enter this mansion, there are zombies, you want to know what happened, and you learn through environmental clues.
Right.
Resident Evil 2, you're in a police station, which was also a museum at one point or some shit. It was weird, but while you're going through it, there's still mysteries. Resident Evil 3, a little less so, because Resident Evil 3 was them departing from the mystery formula towards action.
Right.
By the time you get to Resident Evil 4, there's really not much mystery. You're just the main protagonist of an action story. There's not much horror anymore. And to compensate for their shortcomings in the horror departments, they had to get with the times. better shooting mechanics, better handling, better controls, better graphical fidelity. And I'll say,
Yeah,
even
go ahead.
today, the game looks pretty good.
Yeah, and that's what I was gonna say is it holds up well, and and I will agree that the overall encompassing, basically the horror perspective of it is a lesser perspective. There is still some horror elements, and I think the primary thing to think about when it comes to Resident Evil 4 is that you are correct. It does depart from the original formula a little bit, which isn't to say that's a bad thing, but it does depart from the original formula. We're no longer working purely on the merit of spooky surroundings and everything else. With the evolution of video games, you can only use the same formula so many times before the formula gets worn out. And I feel like that's what Capcom thought was happening, is that they had made all these games. They had some pretty critical success with the main title games, but some of the offshoots didn't receive the same amount of love. So they kind of thought, well, we may need to evolve a little bit with the times, which then produced Resident Evil 4. Obviously, we know that Resident Evil 4, you know, it had its origins. It was going to be more supernatural, kind of like we talked about in the last one.
Yeah.
But they ultimately ended on the product that we received, which wasn't bad. Again, the Resident Evil 4 game wasn't horrible, but it did depart from that original formula of spooky zombies and these grotesque creations of science that have no reason existing. And obviously, there was still some of that. I will always hold dear that the Iron Maiden and the oh shit, what was that thing called? The Regenerator.
Yes.
That part of Resident Evil 4, in my opinion, is probably one of the scariest sections of any video game that I've ever played. Because you're close. Go ahead.
It was one of the first times in a Resident Evil game when you were faced with an enemy that you could not beat unless you knew exactly how to kill it.
Right.
Like, at least, Nemesis and the Tyrants, you can kill them with enough bullets. You can slow them down. But Regenerators and Iron Maidens, they don't stop coming. Even if you shoot off their legs, they're still coming for you.
Yeah,
That was
exactly.
terrifying.
And that's what I was going to say, is that you have this enemy that it's not unbeatable, but it's difficult enough that you basically, in your mind, you're like, I just need to slow this guy down so that way I can get around him. That was my whole ideology. And when I first played the game, obviously, I go back now, and I actually recently played Resident Evil 4 about 5 months ago. And when I went back through, my playthrough was obviously a lot quicker, a lot smoother. I was able to better equip myself because I remembered where all the treasure was and everything else. So it's like, I remember those things, but during that first playthrough, it's like it actually held quite a bit of fear for me, because even on subsequent playthroughs, it's like I kind of knew how to take down the Regenerators, but it wasn't enough information for me to be successful. So you really, really, really had to, really focus on that. But go ahead.
It really does. It makes you think. If they're remaking the game, do you think they will go out of their way to include that?
And that's actually what I was going to kind of jump into, is, the likelihood that we're going to see some of the elements from the old Resident Evil get, refreshed and recycled into the new. And, and so here's kind of where we're at, because in order to determine whether or not Resident Evil 4 Remake will be successful, we have to determine were the other remakes successful, right? So we have the original Resident Evil remake. We're talking about the one. Let me look real quick.
What, Resident Evil 1 remake?
Yeah, when did that come out?
Shit, I want to say 2008 on the GameCube.
It was actually 2002.
Shit.
And it was for the GameCube.
God, I'm old.
And then, so Resident Evil 4 came out in 2005, and Resident Evil 0 came out in 2002. So Resident Evil 0 and the Resident Evil 1 remake actually came out in really close succession to each other. Resident Evil 0, if people don't know, was supposed to be a prequel to the Resident Evil game. It was also supposed to kind of take place alongside it. But
Yeah, it kind of explained why you as Alpha Team were in the forest looking for Bravo Team. Because the first game doesn't explore that shit at all. You
right.
just show up, fucking Rebecca's there, and then you find some dead bodies from the other team, and you're like, oh shit, guess they're gone.
And so Resident Evil 0, we're not going to talk about too much because it was actually a pretty fun game. It introduced a pretty interesting mechanic, it being, it wasn't 2-player, but you basically had an AI partner. That was the first time that they'd ever introduced that. The AI wasn't great, but it was there.
Yeah, it definitely could use some work, but I
Right.
will say, I would love to see them remake. Ironically enough, I want to see them remake Resident Evil 1 remake and just include the entire Resident Evil 0 as a side story.
That's what I was going to say. Is I feel like eventually, once they get through remaking the games that have not already been remade, I think that they will go back and remake Resident Evil 1 and the RE engine, because that's the big thing, is that now they have the RE engine, which they did not have in 2002. And I feel like that's a kind of a deal breaker when it comes to how successful these new Resident Evil games are, because, the remakes are being basically remade top to bottom, with all new assets. And obviously Resident Evil 1 and 0 were both new assets as well, but they're obviously made on the same engine, and they're not that great in terms of like intuitiveness. They're basically old Resident Evil tank mechanics with a couple of extra features, more polished.
Yeah, so you can put as many new coats of paint on a piece of shit. It's still going to be a piece of shit, but it's going to look nicer.
And that's really what they did for the Resident Evil 1 remake. I mean, obviously there was a lot of different things, a lot of extra content in regards to, how the game actually played through, but
oh yeah,
purely in regards to how the game, basically the game's core, it's the same Resident Evil 1 game, barely differentiated, just more well polished. And granted, it does look good. It's not, in my opinion, what a remake should be, but obviously it's me. So obviously the Resident Evil 1 remake was moderately successful. Obviously there could have been better things about it. The Resident Evil 2 remake, as we've discussed, was incredibly successful, and in my opinion is also one of the best Resident Evil games of the modern age, if not the best. Resident Evil 7 obviously is still great. And then, of course, we have the Resident Evil 3 remake, which we've already talked about, was good. It was just very short. And we have our Resistance, which is a piece of trash. So,
yeah, it's important to remember that Resident Evil 3 remake it has the makings of a great game. Good character design, good story, a good, very well put together world that feels lived in. You can go places and be like, oh look, there's a dead body in a diner next to a plate of food that looks kind of old.
Right.
You can tell that these are real environments. It's very well put together. The problem was Capcom wasn't selling Resident Evil 3 Remake. They didn't even announce Resident Evil 3 Remake first. They said, oh, we're going to put out Resistance, Resident Evil Resistance. And it's going to be a multiplayer game. And they knew no one was going to buy that shit right off the... Like, sorry, I'm getting a little flustered thinking about how angry I am. But basically, they knew it was not going to be a top seller. They knew it was, at best, a multiplayer mode to a better game. So they waited to announce Resident Evil 3 Remake until they already announced that, so that they could trick us into buying both at the same time.
Exactly. And I think that's the big issue that I have with the game, is not only is the game just, honestly, it's trash. I mean, but beyond it just being trash, the company that I can, very frankly tell you that I love Capcom. Capcom has made some really good stuff in its day. So for a company like that I trust for the most part, like Capcom, because every game that they've made prior to this remake has been at least moderately entertaining, and it didn't make me angry. Even games that I didn't really care for, like Code Veronica, I still liked because the game itself was still fun. It had its Resident Evil, likeness to it. But this new game, the Resistance in Resident Evil 3, it made me angry because it was a cash grab. They
Exactly.
want they wanted to sell Resistance. So instead of just selling Resistance as its own thing and actually spending time on Resident Evil 3 Remake, they sold you this package bullshit that was a bundle, and the bundle was garbage. It was a literal hot piece of shit, and it honestly has no place being in the Resident Evil universe. Don't get me wrong. I, for a long time, said that there should be a multiplayer Resident Evil game. I've always said that if they remade Survivor, or not Survivor, Outbreak, that it would be a success. But they did not do it the right way. They made Resistance, and they tricked us all into buying it, so that way we would buy Resident Evil 3 Remake.
The biggest problem is the fact that Resident Evil multiplayer has been tried so many times before. The Outbreak formula, it worked, and I would argue that if they remade that, it would be phenomenal.
Oh yeah.
But then look at Operation Raccoon City. Bad. It was enjoyable in the sense that if you like a fast-paced action over-the-shoulder shooter set in the Resident Evil universe, but it wasn't a good Resident Evil game.
Exactly.
And the multiplayer had so many issues. Then look at, and I hate to bring this up, what's it called? Umbrella Corps? You ever heard of that?
Yeah. And my issue with Umbrella Corps is that they were trying to cash in on the success of
Esports.
esports. What was the Tom Clancy game or fucking Rainbow Six game, Siege?
Yeah,
They
Rainbow
were
Siege.
they were trying to capitalize on honestly the remarkable success, because I did not think Siege was that good of a game when it first came out. They capitalized on the remarkable success of Rainbow Six Siege, made their own formula of it. And don't get me wrong, the game could be entertaining, but it's still hot garbage.
Oh, yeah. And it's not to say that a team-based shooter set in Resident Evil couldn't work, but the way they went about it was so shit that the entire experience was unenjoyable. I bought it on accident for like $5, booted it up, and then literally said, fuck this shit, I would rather gouge out my own eyeballs. And to continue, honestly, Resident Evil multiplayer could work. There are ways they could do it to make it work. But they keep doing this thing where they love to experiment. Instead of doing a tried and true multiplayer, they want to try new game modes with new little twists and turns. And they focus so much on that they made a subpar Resident Evil 3 remake. Which should have been hard, given that all of the assets from Resident Evil 2 remake, just port them over and you have a good chunk of RE3 right there.
And that's honestly, and this even kind of bleeds into our other topics about how the remakes, because basically, to kind of circle back to our original our conversation is that the opportunity for Resident Evil 4 to have a successful remake, we're kind of looking at a 50-50. Resident Evil 1 remake, I'm not really going to include it in my analysis just because it was made before the RE engine. It was honestly, I think it was made because they really hadn't put out a good Resident Evil game in a little while. And I think that they were kind of drying up a little bit when it came to, residuals from the other games. So I think that they're like, shit, we just need to put something out. So they, whipped together the 0 and 1, which again aren't bad games by any means, but they obviously aren't, the best of the best. So so for my analysis on whether or not Resident Evil 4 remake will be good, it needs to have three things. Number one, it needs to be its own game, and they need to focus on it as if it is its own game.
Exactly.
They need to do what they did with Resident Evil 2, because Resident Evil 2 was years in the making, obviously, and you can tell by the work that they put into Resident Evil 2 and the product that we received that Resident Evil 2 was a passion project. It was, and you can tell. So I want that same passion put into the Resident Evil 4 remake. Number two, it, outside of what was already mentioned here, it needs to be its own passion project and everything else, and whatever other assets. It does need to be a different game. It cannot be a reskin of the Resident Evil 4 game just plastered into the RE engine. It genuinely needs to be different. And I'm not saying that you can't follow the same, guidelines or that you can't follow the same stuff, but it needs to be different because the Resident Evil 2 remake was different. And it was different enough that it was a new game, but it was still, nostalgic, right?
I think that, how do I put this? I would not mind playing Resident Evil 4 with a new, fresh coat of paint, but I would rather see them go above and beyond,
Right.
I want to see, because the original Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 4, there's no progression. You go from a rookie cop right to a battle-hardened government agent with nothing in between. So I think this is a great opportunity to take a slightly more experienced Leon, but still pretty rookie, put him in a government agency, and then show us his progression to that grizzled, old agent we see in Resident Evil 6. It's a great story point they can throw in, but more so than that, come on. As wild as Resident Evil 4 was, make Resident Evil 4 Remake as wild. We just randomly went to a fucking castle. A haunted ass looking castle and fought blind dudes with Wolverine claws.
I mean, and that's what I was going to say is it needs to be crazy like the original one, but it needs to be a different kind of crazy. It needs to be, because what Resident Evil 3 the Resident Evil 3 remake did well was they took monsters from the original Resident Evil 3 and they did something different with them. The wall crawlers or whatever else, they were different. They were in the game.
Yeah, the drain demos.
Exactly. And they had all kinds of different things that were fantastic, that were similar to the old game, but different enough to the point where you were still like, oh shit, like I don't know how to handle this. So they need to do that. Go ahead.
I do want to jump in real quick, and I want to say this and direct this to Capcom right now. Dear Capcom, Resident Evil 3 Remake is a brilliant idea. Your only problem is the fact that you tipped your hand and proved to the world that you didn't give a shit about Resident Evil 3 Remake. You were just making it to convince us to buy the other product. You should not have put in a newsletter that you were not going to continue updating Resident Evil 3 and instead focus only on Resistance. You should have made Resident Evil 3 Remake at least twice as long as it is. You cut out so many areas of the original game. The clock tower that you condensed down to a single boss fight. What the fuck is that, huh? The fucking... I want to say the Dead Factory, because the Dead Factory we ended up getting was literally only 2 hallways with a couple rooms attached and a boss fight.
Yep.
And, I mean, there's so many things that easily could have been improved upon. You could have taken the same game verbatim and just improved the graphics, put it in the new engine, and then just slightly tweak the story cues. Hell, if you wanted, you could take the game you have right now and then make expansions onto it. Let us play as fucking Carlos when he's not with Jill. There's tons of points where we just don't see what happens to him, where he's traveling from point A to point B, and we teleport back to Jill instead because we would rather watch her do whatever dumb shit than Carlos running through the city killing zombies.
Right.
It's a little thing. Little things like that they could have done. Hell, even the fact that after all this time, it's been out. They've only released one thing, and that was a DLC for like $5 or $10 that unlocks all the unlockable shit, like the fuck were those? Like the attack coins and the defense coins?
Right. Basically, the perk coins.
Yeah, it was literally them saying, hey, if you don't want to play the game multiple times to unlock this useless shit, here's a fucking pay-to-play means to do it.
And that's what I was going to say, too, and that honestly goes into because I said there were 3 things that I wanted, and I said 2 of them. The third thing I was going to say was it needs to have a lot of replay value.
Exactly.
Because the original Resident Evil 4, it had Mercenaries mode, it had Project Ada, it had Assignment Ada, it had a literal time mission where you played as Ada, which was Project Ada or whatever. But then they had Separate Ways, which was a whole story mode different because you got to see the Ada Wong side of everything, And then you had Mercenaries where you had all these characters, these unlockable characters that you could play through on different maps and whatever else. And so that you need to do that with this game too. You can't do the bullshit that you did with Resident Evil 3 remake because there was no extra content. It was just the game. And the game was not enough.
Yeah, literally all you could do is once you beat the game, if you want, use the points you earned and buy an infinite ammo gun, then go play the exact same fucking game beat for beat with no difference.
And here's the deal: is when the game first came out, I played the game through a total of 4 times, pretty much back to back. But after that 4th time, I was just like, "There's nothing new. There's nothing more for me to do in this game." I can continue playing this game through on different difficulties and shit, but the difficulties really don't change the game. I know that they have nightmare mode and stuff, but to the average gamer, that doesn't mean shit to us. The extra difficulties only make the game more difficult. And that's all it is really.
Yeah. And it doesn't help that Nemesis was so underutilized. He is such an interesting character. The way he stalks you, the way that he can, literally, I remember watching an amazing video from this streamer playing the game where he got Nemesis trapped behind a fence. And he was too big to fit through the door. So the streamer was taunting him, haha, you fucking idiot. What are you going to do? Dude literally just jumped up and disappeared out of frame. And the dude freaked out. Came out of nowhere and turned his ass to grass.
Exactly. So it's the assets are there to make Nemesis into a Mr. X.
Exactly.
And because Mr. X, honestly, Mr. X was fantastic. I remember him briefly from the original Resident Evil 2, but the Mr. X that we saw in the remake was horrifying. Everything about Mr. X was absolutely horrifying. He pretty much always knew where you were, and we really didn't get to feel that with Nemesis because almost all of the Nemesis portions were scripted.
Which was a real crying shame.
It was, and I feel like because in the original Resident Evil 3, you get to, it's not a whole lot of exploration of the police station, but there's enough exploration that Nemesis can follow you around.
And that is wild, that they have the entire police station mapped out. They could do anything with that, with Jill and Nemesis. And they chose to only limit us to a very small portion of it. Why? Why would they willingly limit themselves like that?
And that's what I was going to say, is that they're putting these purposeful blockers in because they're basically putting more work in front of themselves to limit the game, which obviously it makes it sound like they're the worst people on earth, but that's not what we're trying to say. Is what we're trying to get at is that the game could have been so much more, and they had all of the tools to make it more.
Oh yeah,
it's not like they needed anything extra. They had everything they needed right in front of them, but they just didn't do it.
I'll admit, we've probably talked enough and complained enough about how fucking annoying Capcom, how they just ruined a good thing, and how Resident Evil 4 Remake, it's kind of a hit or miss, We could get the next big Resident Evil game after Resident Evil 8, or we could get another hot pile of shit.
But they may want to try and market us another bullshit. Maybe they want to make
Exactly.
a what's the maybe they want to make a dating sim Resident Evil game, and they're going to sell Resident Evil 4 as an add-on.
Well, hold on now. Let's not cast judgment too early. I
Right?
might
Yeah.
play that.
Right.
As
So
long
I
as
guess
Billy Cohen is in it.
that's right. Damn straight.
I got a thing for bad boys.
So I guess the last thing we kind of want to talk about is some other ideas for remakes. So we even kind of talked about an Outbreak remake a little bit, so we won't talk about that too much. But there are a lot of Resident Evil games in the universe that are, underutilized in some way, shape, or form that could potentially use a remake. Um, so, Salsa, give me a few Resident Evil games that you would like to see remade that we haven't already seen be remade, I should say.
Oh boy, are you in for a treat. Now, in my free time, I love to just come up with these ideas for remakes, remasters, redesigns. I have a whole theory about what Ubisoft should do with their Assassin's Creed games. And it involves a beautifully designed, like Master Chief Collection-esque, but remakes. But back to Resident Evil, right off the bat. Resident Evil 1 and 0, remake them into one game and call it Resident Evil 1 Remake.
Yeah,
Simple. We've already talked about it. There's nothing more to say there. Everyone would love it. Just don't fuck with it too much.
exactly.
Because it literally gives you the option to play as the Chris or the Jill campaign. Plus, for added playability, you can play the fucking Rebecca campaign, which you could divide it into two and also do a Billy campaign, but I think they should just keep that one together. That gives
Right.
you 3 campaigns to play in one game, a good amount of bang for your buck, plus all the bonus shit you got in the original. But more importantly, I'm thinking Resident Evil Chronicles. It'll be a remake of all of these side games. Right off the
Like
bat.
like the rail shooters, you mean?
No, not quite. I'm thinking Resident Evil Chronicles as in the side stories that don't involve main characters. So right off the bat, I want it to include Outbreak 1 and 2. Let's say Survivor 1 and 2. That's 4 games right there. That's a good start for a $60 remake. And then I want every, I don't know, every few months or every year they make a new remake and market it as a $20 DLC. So like you can throw in shit. I'm running out of fucking side stories for Resident Evil, but I know there's a shit ton of them.
Well, I mean, there's like Dead Aim. You have the Umbrella Chronicles, the Dark Side Chronicles, because they have some extra side missions and shit like that. I mean, really, that's just about it. You have Resident Evil Gaiden, if I remember right, which is the Game Boy game.
Here, let me go to the Resident Evil list of Resident Evil media so I can see all the games in here. Spin-offs on the console. Survivor, that's a good one. Gaiden, not even going to talk about it.
See, Resident Evil Gaiden, I think Resident Evil Gaiden just fell victim to the fact that Capcom wanted to make a Game Boy game. They wanted to make a mobile Resident Evil game, and it just didn't work. I feel like if you were to give it a fair shake and make an actual game out of it, I feel like it could be good.
I'm not going to say yes or no to that. I would simply say that it was a product of its time. And looking back on it, we can say with 2020 vision that it was a bad idea. But at the time, it was worth a shot.
Well, that's what I was gonna say is that, and like there are other games that are like that I would like to see kind of followed up on. Personally, I really liked Resident Evil Dead Aim, which is a light gun shooter. It was you were third person, and then you then switch between third and first person. Third person was for any movement. First person was for shooting mechanics. And not to say that the shooting mechanics were bad, because they were actually pretty good. but it fell victim to the issues that you have with games of that time, because it looks like Dead Aim came out in 2003. So Dead Aim, it was just, I don't know, man. It's one of those things. It fell victim to its time. It could have been good, but I feel like they were trying too hard to push that first person perspective, and it just wasn't ready yet.
Exactly. And okay, so let me rephrase my original idea. The base Chronicles should just include Outbreak and Dead Aim for $60. And then every DLC, $20. That gives them Survivor, Outbreak File 2, fucking... I feel like there's another one there that I'm missing. Basically, they could easily milk 4, 5, even 6 games and turn it into $120.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, and I would buy that too, because you have the base game, which has 2 games that needed a remake, and then you have all this add-on that would be worth the money. You know what I mean? I would pay $20 to get a whole nother game that's been remade, but I just don't want another Resident Evil 3 mishap where I'm paying $60 for Resident Evil Resistance with Resident Evil 3 on the side. But I agree with what you're saying. In theory, that's a good formula. Obviously, I don't think Capcom will do anything close to that.
Listen, Capcom, if you're listening, I am a very cheap employee. You just send me some money, I will send you a shit ton of good ideas.
That's right.
Like, I'll explain to you Capcom right now. If you had just released Resident Evil 3 as a $30 game, you would not be hearing any of this complaining.
No, I agree.
Because a cheap game can be short. A cheap game doesn't need a lot of replayability. Like releasing Resident Evil Survivor as a remake as a DLC for $20, yeah, I'm not expecting it to have like 20 game modes and 50 hours of gameplay. Right. I'm paying for a $20 DLC. As long as it gives me more than what I already have, it's already successful.
Exactly. But the primary issue we have is that we paid for a game because the reason we bought the package was because we wanted Resident Evil 3.
Yeah.
I was willing to give Resident Evil Resistance a chance, but it failed spectacularly. It was not at all entertaining. And honestly, it's a pay-to-play game, because you don't automatically unlock everything at first. You have to either work your way through and unlock the characters and the weapons and the add-ons, or you can pay and just unlock everything. Not to mention, you have to pay to play online, so it's not a free-to-play game, really. I downloaded the game, and it's pretty much fucking useless. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I'll be honest. I got pretty much nothing out of it.
I opened it and I played it one time just to kind of see, because you can play it on like pacifist mode, where like it'll spawn zombies and you can kill zombies and everything else, but it's not actually it's not actual like an actual main game. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like you have all the the criteria. I played obviously I played the tutorial, but then I played like a pacifist mode where it just spawns pretty weak zombies and you can kind of explore. And it is a good idea in theory, but the way they executed it is not good. It's pay to play. It's pay to win, I should say. And technically it's pay to play too if you want to play online, because the whole format was meant to be online, right? So it's like, I gotta pay to play online, and I gotta pay $60 to get the game. Like, what's the point?
It was nothing more than they wanted quick money and they wanted to test out a new formula. They should have known it wasn't going to work. Because even now, how many people do you see playing that game who are not being paid to play that game?
That's what I was going to say. You have a lot of these there are some big streamer types that I see playing Resident Evil Resistance. But there's one, I can't remember who they are now off the top of my head, but they play, they did play Resident Evil Resistance, but it was almost like they were being forced to play it. And I have a feeling they probably had some kind of sponsorship deal to do it.
Yeah, you know there's some money behind the scenes on that one.
So, and I mean, and that just kind of further, further perpetuates the issue that I'm kind of seeing here, which is that it's just not good, man. There's nothing good about it. Nothing good about the situation.
I got another one for you.
I'm listening.
Obviously, in my personal opinion, I'm okay with them remaking every game up till Resident Evil 6. I do not think it's too soon for a Resident Evil 6 remake.
Oh yeah.
Resident Evil 5, I'm 50-50. If Resident Evil 4 is good enough, I think a Resident Evil 5 remake could be good.
Right. Well, I think that there needs to be at least 10 years of time between the games for there to be a remake. So I think, like, because Resident Evil 6 came out in 2012, so we need to wait.
2009. Shit, that's
Yeah.
a long time ago now that I think about it.
It's 2020, so that came out 11 years ago. So, with Resident Evil 4 and 5, I would accept a remake of both of those.
Oh, yeah.
I would also accept a remake of Resident Evil 6 if it was done properly and if they wait a few years.
I'll tell you one right off the bat. Code Veronica.
I would play a remake of Code Veronica. Like I said earlier, I didn't really care for Code Veronica just as a whole.
Original Code Veronica really did glare dirty, to be honest.
I was gonna say because I've played the remaster, like Code Veronica. Well, I played Code Veronica X on the PlayStation 2.
Yeah.
Which was a re-release, wasn't it? Or it was like they did something to it different.
Yeah, I would say originally it was Resident Evil Survivor 2 Code Veronica. I don't know what the differences were, other than what's his face? Fucking the little boy in that game. What was his name?
So here's what happened. So Resident Evil Code Veronica came out, and this, if I'm not mistaken, and you can Google this obviously, but if I'm not mistaken, Code Veronica came out originally in the year 2000 on the Dreamcast. But I don't think that it was. I'm not 100% sure. Yeah, it was a English release, I'm pretty sure. But it was released on the Dreamcast, and then they made Code Veronica X, which was released on the PlayStation 2, the GameCube, and then remade for the newer consoles.
Yeah, so, you're
right. And the Resident Evil Survivor 2 Code Veronica was a remake of Code Veronica a year later, but it was like an arcade style shooter. Like a dungeons. Right. It was a dungeon style shooter, if I'm not mistaken. Or no, it wasn't a dungeon style shooter. There was a mode that was a dungeon style shooter, but the Resident Evil 2 Survivor 2 was like a first person arcade style game.
Looks like you're right so far. What I do know is I remember watching a behind the scenes footage where they were talking about Resident Evil Code Veronica. Apparently, Code Veronica was originally Resident Evil 3.
Yeah,
and that's why it has worse controls, is because it used an earlier version of the fucking game engine, and that's why it doesn't have dodge mechanics. But Resident Evil 3 was rushed out as a spin-off of Resident Evil 2, literally using a fair chunk of the original map.
And obviously Resident Evil 3 is a fantastic property, so I mean it's by no means a bad game, but it definitely felt kind of rushed because it didn't kind of fulfill the same mechanics that we not to say it didn't fulfill the same mechanics, but it was a shorter game.
Yeah.
But it wasn't significantly shorter that it was like super noticeable. It wasn't like, the Resident Evil 3 debacle.
Ironic.
Yeah. Right. But you're right, because I remember we've talked about this before. You've told me this before, but Code Veronica was originally supposed to be Resident Evil 3, which is why it's technically a worse game mechanic wise. But it was made on a different engine with different mechanics.
Yeah.
And then they released Resident Evil 3, which had dodge mechanics, which were amazing.
And I will say, I think Veronica has an interesting enough story, and it could easily be remade into something super enjoyable. it just fell victim to bad mechanics, very bad voice acting. The fucking Alfred dude, God, he was so annoying back in the
Oh
day.
yeah, yeah, Alfred Ashford.
Yeah. But worst of all, the game was so dark and just you couldn't even tell if the graphics were good or bad because of how fucking dark the game was.
It was just kind of grimy. I mean,
Exactly.
that's the
And
best
don't get
way
me
I can think of
wrong,
it.
grimy can be good, but it was grimy like everything seemed blurry and hazy and shadowy and all I'm saying is
Yeah. No,
Code Veronica remake, fucking amazing. Go for it. And just remember, lights and candles do exist this time. You don't have to make us play the entire game at night in the fucking dark ass end of the world.
I will also say Code Veronica is one of the games that I've not been able to finish because of how long it is. That
Yeah,
game is so fucking long. Please, for all that love is holy, don't get me wrong. I like long games, but make the remake shorter. Jesus Christ, make that game a lot shorter because it was hard for me to stay focused because the game itself didn't really interest me to begin with because the story mode just didn't keep me enticed. After the initial gameplay area, there's a lot of backtracking. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm cool with backtracking. That's part of the puzzle. But there was too much backtracking. You know what I mean?
yeah, like I remember at one point you literally have to go from the beginning all the way across the island to some fucking shack to do
Yep.
something, but you can't get in there unless you drop off all your metal shit. So you have to
Yep.
go all the way back to get a composite. It was, and nothing happens other than a couple more zombies and some dogs would spawn. There was not
Exactly.
even good audio cues to make it seem more scary.
And that's just what I was going to say is that Code Veronica failed in that perspective. But I think that a remake could have strong potential to basically make up for what the original game failed in. So I don't think we should drag this on too much longer. But basically, we both really like Resident Evil. We think that Capcom has a lot of great potential. It has a lot of properties that it could be more successful in the future. We're really excited for the Resident Evil 8 game in 2021, and then
Oh fuck yeah!
ideally we'll have Resident Evil 4 remake in 2022 because they so far they've done it. Resident Evil 7 remake was 2017, Resident Evil 2 remake was 2019, Resident Evil 3 remake was 2020, and then 2021 will be Resident Evil Village. So then theoretically the next game should be a remake. So hopefully Resident Evil 4 remake we'll see in 2022, maybe sooner. Who the hell knows? Um, and yeah, and Capcom hire us both. We'll make remake games for you. We'll make you some money. Um, but next week we're going to actually take a little bit of a different turn into partly another franchise that we both enjoy. Next time we're going to jump into Silent Hill a little bit. Not too
As
deep.
best as we can. Let's be real.
Right. So we've not played all of the games. I don't know the entirety of the lore. I've maybe played the first 4 games. Yeah, maybe. Um, but mainly what we want to do next time is talk about Konami. We want to offer some critiques. And for anybody who knows, we're going to talk about Silent Hills and how absolutely devastating I'm absolutely devastated both Salsa and I were with the subsequent news of that game. In addition to that, we may be able to get to talk about Tom Clancy a little bit, but
We did mention it in an earlier episode, but our episode's been pretty full up until now.
that's what I was gonna say. I was say we may want to offer a little bit more detail to it because a lot of our previous episodes were very full of other stuff, and that was just kind of a little bit of a segue. So next time we're going to really hit hard on Konami, and depending on how much time we have next time, we may talk a little bit about Tom Clancy. But for right now, I think we're going to leave it there. Hope you guys enjoyed the Resident Evil discussion. I love talking Resident Evil. I could talk about it all day. But as always, and I'll say my bit, and then Salsa can say his bit. But stay safe, stay happy, stay healthy, and continue to keep on growing. Salsa, close us out.
Speaking of bits, suck on my bit.
Wonderful.